Welcome to another episode of God in the Middle with Karina and Cass. I am your co host, Cass, and Karina will introduce herself and our guest in a moment. But God in the Middle is where we talk about all the ways God has his hand in our triumphs, in our tragedies, and our victories. And we have another wonderful guest to share her story with you. Karina, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Cass. Yeah, this morning I'm just absolutely thrilled to be able to share this time with my youngest daughter, Cayla Rochelle. She has an amazing God story and a story that people need to hear, a story of hope and a story of transformation and redemption of her life. And so without further ado, I introduce Cayla Rochelle. And Cayla, how are you this morning?
I'm
Or this
great.
afternoon?
Yeah, doing good. Just got off work a little early on a Friday, so can't complain about that.
Yeah.
Blessings come in all sizes.
That is true. Yeah.
And you've had a couple busy weeks. Last weekend, you want to share a little bit about what you did last weekend?
Yeah, for sure. Me and you and my oldest sister were all invited to go speak at a conference called Cherish, hosted by his house, which is in Shell Knob. It's like a residential facility. And we went and helped facilitate a retreat of sorts. So a bunch of women there, about 60 to 75 women, and there was 6 speakers that came and shared their story, just shared about what God has done in their life, just really to share their hope and their faith with other women to help encourage them. And really a lot of it ended up being a lot about identity.
Mm,
And just who we are and whose we are and how
mm,
that has really it just kept being like a reoccurring theme throughout everyone's share, so it's
mm.
really cool.
Well, it's awesome that you could be a part of it, and it was an awesome event. And really, that's what God in the Middle is all about. Is we want to share those stories with people so that they can have hope in their walk. And Cayla, you have quite the story, and I've been a front row um, spectator, or let's see, spectator, coach. I've played a lot of parts in it, but I don't know exactly where you want to start, but you want to share a little bit about where you're coming from and why we asked you to share today.
Yeah, sure. um I grew up in the church. I won't give too much about like my past like childhood, but I grew up in a godly family. We were, raised in the church. But once I got into college, I just started to have a lot of questions. I think that my faith didn't have a lot of roots. It's also when I started drinking a lot more. And in my circle of friends, it was just that was just accepted. The way that I drank was accepted. It was just very normal. And went in and out of a lot of like hard jobs and realized that alcohol had just become kind of a friend to me. It's the way that I coped.
Mhm.
And I have my whole life have had very strong emotions, and um, I feel deeply about everything. And so alcohol was one way that I could kind of numb down a little bit. And it was probably um, when I was 21 that I realized that I drank every day, but I didn't really think I had a problem or really cared about it. But fast forward into 2015 is when I really realized that like I had a problem. I had a lot of people tell me that I had a problem, but I wasn't really ready to hear that. And so I went and got um, I went into established care with a primary care physician, and she asked me how much I was drinking, and I decided to actually be honest for the first time. And I was having a lot of health concerns. And the more we talked, she said to me, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And I said, "Yes," even though at the time I wasn't sure what I believed in, but He said, "Do you really believe that he died for you to treat your body like this?" And for whatever reason, it really penetrated my heart, and, I called my mom immediately following and said, "Hey, I'm gonna stay at your house for a while to detox, and I'm gonna go find an AA meeting." And that began, my journey in recovery, um, which is just a small part of my story. Um,
Go ahead.
okay.
So you
Um,
would have been in your late 20s.
yeah. Yeah, I was in my late 20s. Um,
And Kayla, were you still attending services or like, did you still have any type of relationship outside of church with God, or what was that like when you were going through this time?
yeah, I was kind of in and out of church. I was really confused, because a lot of my community that I grew up in or had a lot of deep relationships and, um, drank like me or, similarly to me. And so their life didn't look much different than mine. Um, and I started like a couple of other churches. I was just really confused. I didn't really have like a personal connection with God. Just a lot of confusion. Um, I would say too, what I learned later was, um, because of a disproportional elevation of relationships in my life, more specifically, like my mom, like I had put my mom kind of on that in that God spot in my heart. It created this tension between her and me and God because I kind of triangulated my relationship with God with my mom, and so as I was walking into adulthood, that became very confusing. Um, and I think that everyone goes through that at some point, where you're really trying to find your own personal faith. Um, but I was thankful that I landed in AA, because I really needed to tear down a lot of lies. And AA gave me the space and environment where, it was safe to do that without any, like, judgment. The church also didn't really know what to do with me with my addiction. It was like, "Well, you need to pray more," or "You need to try harder," and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop drinking. So I that was also confusing, like, there was something wrong with me, when I just didn't have the proper support, really.
You've said so many kind of really important things that I think we need to take a step back to. One thing you said was that you associated your mom with God, like that was, and I think that's really important to kind of talk about because when we backslide or when we fall into some sort of bondage, it can be, I have, in my experience, it could be easy to avoid people who have a form of godliness that we immediately recognize, right?
Mm,
We get concerned about their shame, their judgment, or how they're going to dissect our sin. But I think that, in my experience anyway, what I had to realize was that no matter what I'm trying to hide from that person who is like that form of godliness for me, like God is should be who I'm more concerned about,
Mm.
not
mhm,
my mother-in-law, not my like not whoever it might be that I know that the power of God in them is so strong that
mhm.
you feel like you just want to avoid them while you're, for me, I'd say filthy, while my filthy rags were just really apparent. So that's one thing. And the other, I'm curious, like your shame that you may have felt, right, when you went to AA,
Mhm,
and they kind of helped you work through that.
mhm.
Did you feel that also, like you said the church didn't know what to do with you. Did you feel that also, right? You had more shame because they didn't know how to handle what you were going through? Is that something that you experienced? And ultimately, how did you kind of work through that? Like, how did you get to the point where you knew that the person at the altar, they don't have all the answers, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so you got to tap into deeper into your spirituality with God to work through the brokenness.
Yeah, to go back to what you had said about, I think that for those of us that have had addiction in our lives, in our families, I think that, um, kind of those codependency tendencies can be like pretty, where it's really easy to put other people in that like idle space. Because even in my sobriety, I've done that. And even when trying to walk with God, um, I think that sometimes we replace our mentors, or replace God with mentors, or replace God with sponsors, or replace spiritual leaders like my mom. Like somehow they become God to us, and the things that we idolize, we end up demonizing. And so if it's not, and what you said is so true, and actually Trina and I at the conference were just talking about this, is instead of thinking like how much space do we take up in our head thinking about what other people are thinking about us or our behavior, or oh, I shouldn't be doing this because so and so is going to give me grief about this, or da 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 da, when really we should be thinking about, what does God say about me? What does God say about my behavior? Would this please my Father, or would this make him sad? Um, and I'm just now, kind of realizing that it's really difficult when to kind of coincide with your other question. I felt shame because I didn't feel understood in the church. The way that I thought and my behaviors, and some of my emotional turmoil just wasn't understood. And the solution was to pray more, but that's not what I needed. What I needed was to be loved and accepted exactly where I was. And I needed a space to go to that was like totally judge free, and that they loved me no matter what. And that's what AA provided for me, was that I showed up and they loved me unconditionally. And I can find a meeting anywhere in Kansas City. Whereas like in the church, they're open Sundays and Wednesdays. And if you don't have a connection with anybody, you can't call anybody when you're in crisis. And AA gave me a list of numbers to call. And then I made relationships. And like I said, I can find a meeting in Kansas City anytime. So I can go and be connected to a body of people. And then I call people all the time, like if I'm struggling, or and they really taught me how to love myself. They showed me that I was worth picking up the phone at 2 a.m. They showed me that I was worth, you know, working intensely on step work and reading literature together. And not that people in the church didn't show me that, but there was like a lack of accessibility, a lack of like true, like doing life together that I needed. I needed that like really intense, because when you deal with addiction, it's all you think about. And church on Sunday isn't going to do it. Like I needed somebody to show me how to have a relationship with God. And I needed to be in community constantly in order to rewire some of my behavior.
I think too, if I can interject, that the church has not necessarily done a good job of allowing sins like this to be openly discussed. And I think partially it's because nobody wanted the spotlight put back on them. They didn't want to. And I'm not speaking this of the church, but people in the church like myself. I was a part of the church, and I didn't know how to deal with somebody else's addiction. And lo and behold, then I became an alcoholic as well. But it was a hush hush subject, just like abortion used to be a hush hush subject, having affairs. But more and more, I think the last 10 years, these things, the church has realized that if we're going to really love people, we have to be open to speak about these things and help people. And there's more and more Christian 12-step programs that the church has begun to implement to give people a space to be able to do that in the church. So I hope that the church is getting the picture, and that we can begin to help everyone who has these problems, and they don't necessarily have to go someplace else to get help.
Look,
Not that AA is a bad thing. So,
right?
yeah.
Jesus came to heal the brokenhearted,
Yeah.
right? He came to heal the brokenhearted. And I think that's what the church forgets. And the church should be filled with the brokenhearted because we all need healing in some way, shape, or form. And so, what you said, Karina, I just wanted to put an exclamation point on that because it's so accurate. And we, the body of the church, and me especially, I never want to be a stumbling block to someone's healing, right? For
Mhm.
adding to that. So thanks for adding that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and I
Cayla,
think yeah.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think that AA does a great job at like embodying what Jesus intended, which is like doing life together and like truly having communion with each other. Um, on the flip side, I had gotten sober and then um kind of traded one addiction for another, like felt emptiness. And so men and alcohol have kind of been the things that I've struggled with. Just longing for belonging. And long story short, shortly into my sobriety, I found out that I was pregnant. When actually I relapsed. I ended the relationship. I relapsed. I couldn't get drunk. Every time I took a drink, I got sick. And then the next day, I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter. And talk about like having your world flipped upside down because I was just newly sober, and then obviously relapsed. And then knowing that like her dad wasn't going to be um, very reliable. So knowing that I was going to be doing it by myself. Um, so I packed up my house that I'd been with my mom and started again. Started a journey, down that path, and that was a lot of learning. And but because of a growing relationship, a growing spirituality, a growing relationship with God, kind of coming into like understanding who I am as a person, um, was able to step into my role as a mom. And I've been sober since. Lord willing, in February, I'll be celebrating 7 years of sobriety. Um, I think God blessed me with my beautiful home. So I was able to buy a house in 2018. So I don't know why I thought it was a good idea to move into a home by myself with an 18-month-old, but I did. And then career-wise, God has really blessed me. I've really been able to rise up in the world of advocacy and coordinated community response for domestic violence. But I still felt like I was still missing something. Like in 2020, I was still kind of trying to date guys again, this whole issue with men. I couldn't, I had so much issues with just being like anxiously attached, and I would basically abandon myself for men. So it's like the same thing with alcohol. Like I would just put them on the throne of my heart. And basically this relationship happened and it left me just like broken again. And I was really frustrated because I was like 5 years sober, and it was probably the worst that I had been mentally and emotionally in my sobriety. And I just kept thinking like that just something's not right. Like something's not working. Um with my relationship with God, I felt like it was deep, and I started practicing like a lot more stillness and prayer and meditation, but I still felt like the way that I was conceiving God was like so abstract. And I had a lot of like animosity towards the church and really just Christianity in general, just the way that it's handled a lot of like social justice issues and race and ethnicity. And working in the field that I work in, you see a lot of discrimination and the church really not dealing with domestic violence situations very well. And I was taking all of that and equating it to God. And that's not who he is. That's the human reflection of who he is. Um, So I just kept asking God, "Who are you? What is your name? And who does that make me?" Because I knew that it was like I just felt so alone. I felt so lonely and unknown and unseen still. And like the way that I loved was broken. And I wanted a family so bad. I wanted to learn how to love well. And I knew that I couldn't do that until I learned how to love myself and truly love God. And the only way you can do that is really getting to know God and getting to know yourself. Um, so that's kind of like the foundation that I started at, was just very simple. Who are you? What is your name? Who does that make me? And I started practicing a lot of just stillness, like a lot of strangely enough, like time in my closet. Because I have a really hard time sitting still, and I was just constantly running from myself. And um, through a series of lots of events, I can share just a few that brought me back to Jesus. Um, I was sitting in the tub again, just like mulling over this relationship. I had ended it, but I was trying to figure out how to like create this loophole to make it okay, like to get him back, and like because I had ended it, but like I still wanted companionship. And as I'm like praying, I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, like I'm literally devaluing myself and making an exception for this man. Why? Like, why am I doing this? And I know what I'm worth cognitively, but I don't know it in my body. And so I asked God, okay, I see this. What do you want me to do? And he said, I want you to rise up and walk in your worth. And I was like, okay. So I like physically did, but then I was like, but now what? But he just kept walking me through like, um, I kept asking, who are you? What is your name? Who does that make me? Um, and one time I was journaling, and this guy that I was dating, he never said my name, which was like really strange to me. Like again, ended it, but I was just reflecting on like the lack of intimacy with him not saying my name. And I was just journaling, and I heard God say, "Well, Cayla, you don't say mine either." And again, just these moments of like, this is like undeniable things where like I can't make this up. I can't it just penetrated my heart. I went to church with my sister on Easter in 2021, and the service was about I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I really struggled with like Jesus is the way. And I was like, how? Like, how can you be the God of all people? How can you, like, this doesn't make sense to me, because I see how people are that are Christians, and I can't have anything to do with that. Like, that's not a God that I want to serve. And, but I felt God was like, Cayla, you want a family more than anything. You want to learn how to love. And all you've done is try to do it your way. How about we do it mine? And so I dusted off my Bible that week, and I started reading in John. And called up a friend, was like, "Hey, where are you going to church?" She told me Church of the Four Corners. So I was like, "Okay, I'm going to church with you on Sunday." When I got back in town, and I walk in, and the pastor's preaching on the origin story of Jesus, John 1. So finally I'm like, "Okay, I'm listening." Like there's just so many things that just kept coming up. And finally, I was driving to work one day, and I'm just like battling. And it was all here. I just was having such a hard time surrendering my heart. And God showed me like, Cayla, you've spent so much time protecting your heart and guarding yourself, and that's not your job. Like I'm the strong tower. I'm your fortress. I'm your defender. And the more keep my guard up to defend myself because of hardship or whatever, I'm also keeping things out like God and other people, and not relying on his strength to really be my defender. And he just showed me that he's Jesus. And who are you? What is your name? And who does that make me? He walked me through all of those things. I asked very specific questions. He gave me very specific answers, and showed me that he is an intimate God, which is what I needed. It's what I longed for, that I wanted a God that could empathize with my pain and that catched every tear. And he showed me like I'm outside of time and space and politics and religion and institutions that you box me in. Like I'm bigger than that. Um, and then I was like, okay, like I can get down with that. Like I can get down with a wild and free God that is so much bigger than my concept of him. Um, and that began my journey back to Jesus, and really brought a lot of healing um, with my mom and my family and a lot of other things.
That was so powerful. You said like there were so many nuggets in there. And as you were speaking, I just kept thinking, well, he was trying to pull you closer. Like he just wanted you to be very intimate with him. Right. And I think that's the difference. We have a tendency to take what I'm going to say the world, but the Christian world is doing and identify that as God. And the truth is, we don't know where anyone is in their journey, right? And many will call themselves by his name and they are not practicing um, the commandments that he left for us, like charity being, number one there. So that's a struggle, right? And depending on where we are in our walk and our faith, we may not understand those things until we have been like at the bottom of the pit, right? And then he starts illuminating and sharing these things to us to break apart that hardening, what the world, what the Christian world has done to us in our walk. So I think that's just so beautiful that you share that so freely. And I'm so glad that you let him get near to you, right? That you answered what he was trying to communicate to you or
Mm,
with you, I should say.
yeah.
Karina, your mic is muted, which has helped, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying it's been quite a journey. And as a mother watching, of course, Cassie and I have talked about how painful it is to watch your adult children from the outside or outside looking in, I guess. But it's so beautiful to watch God transform them. And then faith arises from that and just is multiplied over and over. Not only have I seen it alter her, but her little girl, who had a lot of questions. She spends the night with us a lot, and I'd be putting her to bed. And well, even just on our trip last week, she said, "Is Mother Nature a god?" Is that how she said it, Cayla?
Yeah.
I'm like, where do you get these questions, girlfriend? You're 5. And so, yeah, but God has brought her so far. I mean, there one time she said, Mimi, why do you talk about God all the time? And I'm
Mm.
like, because I love God
Mhm.
and he's my savior. Well, why? And you just keep answering the questions as they come. But to see her come from that to now she's worshiping Jesus. She's
Oh,
leading worship in her little Sunday school class.
oh.
Yeah. So to see the change in her too is amazing. It does a mother's heart well. I want to read something quick that I just feel like really kind of ties this. This is actually a quote from Joni Eareckson Tada, who is a Christian woman who is a quadriplegic. She dove into a swimming pool like 30 plus years ago, and became a quadriplegic. And she is actually an artist. She draws with her mouth
Mm.
and has done some amazing artwork. She's an amazing woman of God. And this is what she says. What she says transcends her own personal struggle with quadriplegia and chronic pain and applies to every circumstance in our lives, whether painful or joyful. She said, I realized that the stakes were far greater, far more immense and cosmic than merely my satisfaction with a wheelchair and its unpleasant baggage,
Mm.
in which we could insert whatever
Yeah.
my satisfaction with my life, my satisfaction with my job, whatever. His glory, I shifted my focus onto God. His glory was at stake, and that made my satisfaction in him not satisfaction with the way things were, the
Mm.
real issue. It was no longer a matter of being content with his plan for my life. It was a matter of finding him utterly and supremely the source of all contentment. This much to my delight would give him the greatest glory. And
Yeah.
that's it right there. And, the Lord
Mhm.
really kind of spoke that to me last weekend was that, there's a Bible verse and a song that says, "Show me your glory." But his glory is seen in Cayla's story. His glory is seen, Cass, in your story. And his glory is seen in everybody's journey and redemption and transformation. And that's what we should be aiming for. It's not about us getting recognition or being on stage or any of that. It's just about bringing glory to his kingdom, to him, and all that he is.
Colossians 3 and work and deed, basically, right? And how does it glorify God? And so that
Yes.
should be the North Star for
Yeah.
certain. Could not agree more.
Yeah.
Not always easy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it.
Well, Cayla, thank you so much for being vulnerable and willing to share your story. And we're excited to see yet where God leads you. Um, it gives me such joy to hear you say the name of Jesus and to give him honor and glory, not only in your life, but in your words. So,
Yeah, it reminds me of, I was listening to a podcast, I don't know, Christy McClellan, if you guys have ever heard of her, she does a podcast called Pearls, but she
mm,
specifically looks at, like, the, Jewish roots of the Bible. It's really beautiful. Um, but she was talking about how when we share our stories and gather with believers and share how God has moved in our lives. So all of these stories that kind of lit the fire in me, um, it makes my light burn brighter, which
mm,
casts out darkness in my life, and it also is light for the people around me. And instead of fearing darkness, we can overcome it with our light,
right.
and we can have this defiant joy. And instead of, again, fearing darkness, we come at it and we laugh. Because when I share my story, I say, God has glory. Jesus overcame death. He overcame all these things in my life. And I don't have anything to fear because Jesus is my Lord and he's my master and he's my lover and he's my father and he's my friend and he's my counselor and he's all these things to me and he will continue to have glory in my life as long as I surrender to him.
Mhm.
And that just, it goes back to the idea of like attraction rather than promotion. I don't need to promote Jesus. I just need to share my story. I just need to
Yeah.
share my life. And when people say how or why, I say Jesus. And the light of my life is what draws people to him, not me, not what I do, not what I say, but what he's done in my life draws people to him.
I love that. Kayla, parting question. What is your go-to verse to get you back to defiant joy when you might be, um, feeling a little weary?
Yes. My confirmation verse was 2 Corinthians, is it 9:12, where Paul's talking about, or is it 12:9? Cool. It's talking about, in my, I will boast in my weakness because when I'm weak, then you are strong. I think a lot of times, especially as a single mom, I function a lot of my days at 20%. And so I could spend, and I do sometimes become, um, where my attention goes, my energy flows. So if I'm constantly thinking about, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed, because that's the reality of my daily life. I work a very strenuous job. I raise a child by myself, financially as well. I own a home. I work another job. So I could get lost in that, or I can rely on the fact that I'm at 20%. And so I'm going to boast more loudly about my weaknesses because when I'm weak, he's strong. So that means if I'm at 20%, that means Jesus fills me with 80. And that's a way better ratio than like if I'm at 100. And so my odds are way better and life's going to be way, way better. So I really try to like rely on that. Um, I also say to myself, this is actually something my sponsor just recently had me write down. Overwhelm is present, but so is joy and peace. You choose.
Mhm.
Because overwhelm will always be there, stress will always be there, temptation will always be there, but so is joy and peace. And so we have a decision to make. What do you give your attention to? Do you want to give your heart to? What do you want to give your life to? And I want to be a woman of joy and peace. I don't want to walk around tired and negative and overwhelmed all the time.
And it's 2 Corinthians 12:9. And he has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may dwell in
Because
Amen.
without my addiction,
me.
I wouldn't be here, without
Yeah.
my struggles with depression, anxiety, without my struggles with men, like wanting to be loved and belong. And yeah, I wouldn't be like my life wouldn't be this way.
Mhm.
He's truly revolutionized and transformed my life. And I think that's the difference that I've really felt with Jesus is um his kingdom isn't meant to be learned, it's meant to be experienced. He's a transformational God. It's not a knowledge that we can gain. It's an experience because it's built on relationship, which means I need to be face to face with him. And
Mhm.
that's where the transformation happens is when my eyes are locked with the lover of my soul, then I'm changed. Then my heart changes. And then in these times of weakness, that's when he gets the glory, is when there's true transformation and freedom in it.
The scripture says, fix my eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of my faith.
Mhm.
It's when we fix our eyes on him that we can truly see him.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
that one, work out your salvation with
Fear and
trembling.
trembling.
Yeah, like I go to that verse a lot because salvation isn't a prayer. It's not this one time, AA taught me that too, is my spiritual condition is contingent upon a daily reprieve, which means I've got to be face to face with Jesus every day. And it's a daily decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. And it's a daily choice. That's why it says you work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Because again, it's not this one point where I made a decision. Every day I have to decide to be surrendered to Jesus. Every day I have to decide to put my armor on. Every day I have to decide that, or thank you, God, or help me, God, for another day to not drink. Help me, God, get through this day, to be a better mom or to be a better advocate or fill in the blank. Um, I think that in religion, sometimes we lose that day to day walk. And the only way that we overcome those really like hard battles in our mind is um, the daily reprieve.
Amen. Well said.
Amen.
Karina, would you like to take us out?
Sure. Well, thank you again, Cayla. We appreciate you sharing your heart. And we're so glad that you were able to join us and get a couple hours off work early.
Yeah. Thanks.
So all too good. And to our audience, thank you so much for taking your time to listen to God in the Middle with Cass and Karina. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with another session. So thank you and have a blessed week.
Thank you all.